All right, guys. So for our third installment of my interview with Dan Gaylinn, practicing psychotherapist, we're going to talk about reaching your full potential, including the environmental factors, overcoming limitations, and the role acceptance plays. Here it is. You're facing the snake. You're getting to the point where you're realizing that you're able to overcome your fear of the snake, but now you're having a lot of those, those triggers that are tied to this fear come out that you're going to have to figure out if you want to even decide to overcome them. And you have a lot of resistance because you're like, well, this is what ties me to my family. This is what ties me to my
Yep.
heritage. This is what ties me to my sense
Yep.
of self.
Yep.
And then this is even like another thing to think about, even what's happening right now, where there's a lot of people. I think a lot of those root issues are coming out now, and they need a place to go. But like you said, we as a society maybe haven't actually come up with a unified way of channeling those things positively.
Right.
So how, as an individual in this chaos, how do you think they could start to navigate when they are in this state? Because I think this is actually where a lot of people maybe fall short.
Yeah.
I'm sure if you go out on the street and you talk to a random person and you
Yep.
talk to them about them facing their fears, I'm sure they could give you some examples of times
Yep.
in their life where they face their fear. I don't think
Yep.
anyone, or I don't think most people are in the extreme where they've
I
never
agree.
faced a fear in their life. But I think like the point that you're bringing up is very, very effective, because it's I think that it's where a lot of us are starting to reach our limits of like us thinking about our potential. We're like, well, we can face easier fears, if like learning how to swim and stuff like that. But when we have these things that are so deep rooted in our identity and our ego, that are all these things are attached to it, how do we start breaking that stuff up so
Yep.
we can actually start to reach a higher level of our potential?
Yeah. I mean, that I think you're putting your finger on a major question. There, there are a lot of um, pitfalls, I guess, that one can fall into. And we've sort of talked about them, and
Mm-hmm.
not wanting to impose a reality on someone who's sort of not uh, accepting of that
not,
particular
re-
paradigm
Not
or
ready, I
worldview.
guess.
And so
Right.
there isn't much, if there isn't room to not negotiate or navigate or find compromise or common ground, then that leaves you with, um, I guess, the aim to model the kind of behavior that you would hope to inspire, which I think
Mm-hmm.
is, comes back to achieving one's human potential, right, to the best of your ability. Like, I can never play. I just watched the Michael Jordan documentary, Last Dance, on the ESPN, and he's just an extraordinary player, like, and as a result of commitment and hard work and discipline and a spirit of just competitiveness that could not be sated. I think he was just, he had a drive in him and an appetite, and that made the people around him better players. That lifted their
Right.
game up. And the reason I'm mentioning it is that watching him, I can never play basketball like that, but it makes me want to be better at whatever it is that I am good at. And I think that that's the kind of thing, like, we recognize extraordinary ability. We there's I don't know if it's like some kind of vicarious mirror neuron thing, but I think it's one of the reasons why we, watch professional sports or professional performances of any kind, is that, if someone who is at the top of their game, there's a part of us that sort of resonates with that and feels, yes, I am participating in that to some, in some way, or it
Right.
inspires me to, you know, um, find a way to feel these feelings more within myself by virtue of what I'm doing and how I'm living my life. And so you model it
Right.
as best you can, and we all, and this is why it's sort of a challenge, because you know we get as far as we get in our own discipline, self-discipline, and practice, and that's, if we find ourselves within a system or a community that is supportive of a particular way of feeling and being, and we're all oriented to this project of self development and human potential, realizing our individual potential, that inspires us to commit to doing that, and makes it, I don't know if it makes it easy, but easier to put in that work. If
Right.
everyone around you is sort of waking up early and meditating or eating healthy food, and it's just that much easier to stick to your diet, and stick to your regimen.
So it's really about mixing in that motivation of trying to seek out people that you find are a good model for the way you want to be, or that inspire you, or like give it, like having a situation where you can face your fears, but you want to mix that with like finding an environment that's going to be beneficial to you and inspiring to you to keep going along that process.
Yeah, right. And where my pitfall is, I recognize, in hearing you say it back to me, is that, waiting for there to be a perfect social setting, it isn't really a viable excuse.
It's difficult. It's like really impossible. Yeah.
It's an impossible project. Maybe, the aim here is you go first, and, by charting that new ground, maybe that attracts those kinds of people around you, right? That like, you lead the way, and you sort of create a wake or a resonance for drawing that kind of community and support. And I think it's probably a little bit of both. Like, you probably draw inspiration from the people who are just like the lead runner in a pack is probably, even though he might be leading the pack, is driven by the people who are right on his tail.
Yeah. He's motivated by everyone behind him, and the fact that he's seeing that what he's doing, inspiring other people to do better, and that's inspiring him to do better. It becomes like a fountain effect. Yeah. And I think that's a really good point too, because I do find that is probably a lot of challenge. There is a lot of challenge with that concept, because a lot of people are always like, I want to find a mentor, I want to find better friends, and there's always that mantra of saying like, I got to cut toxic people out of my life, I got to find better people to hang out with. But it's always that process of like, okay, you could cut the toxic people out of your life, but then you can't just like snap your fingers and expect the right people to show up.
No.
You have to be able to have that inner strength to be stuck in that process for a period of time.
Right.
If you get that support externally, it's great. But if you don't have it, you still have to have the inner strength to keep going.
Right. And there's a sort of an existential truth in that. Like, we're all sort of isolated in our own experience, our own heads. No matter how much support you draw from others, it's you and, whatever it is, this challenge, this particular, task or, ordeal. And it's always, it's always that way. Right.
Right.
You against your creator, if you will, or, you against your own, you against the blank page or the blank canvas, you against this particular, weightlifting feat. It's like, you may be able to work out and have coaches, with people who are like similarly motivated, but it's your body and your mind that will make it happen.
We'll get you there. It's not. Yeah.
Right.
You can use other people's motivation, but you at the end of the day, you're going to have to forge the course no matter what.
Right. And show up and do the work. And so that's what makes, in my view, what makes people more than normal. And an analogy I often use with my clients is that if you're familiar with, SpaceX and NASA just sent a shuttle to the International Space Station, have to produce enormous amounts of thrust and energy to push this, I don't know what the weight of these rockets are, but it's many, many tons.
They're not light. Yeah.
Into outer space. And it's an enormous amount of thrust in order to achieve what is, I think the term is escape velocity. So it's a minimum amount of thrust that's needed in order to escape the gravity
the confines of the current situation that they're in.
Correct. You got it.
Yeah, that's a great analogy, right?
And so, short of that, you're going to plummet right back down to earth. But that, that amount or more, and you've successfully achieved escape velocity, and you're in Earth's orbit, right? You're out of
Right.
the
And now
ground.
you don't have the gravity pulling you down anymore, and you don't have to exert a lot of the energy you exerted just to get out of that current situation that you're in, that you've broken out of it. Now you can
Yep.
get a little bit more into coasting mode, and that's okay because you
Yeah.
are going in the
Right.
right direction, and you're
Well, in fact, there's very little resistance once you achieve space, right? There, like
right, right.
the resistance of the atmosphere is almost nil when you achieve, then a little bit of thrust actually will send you in a particular direction until something else acts upon you. So
Right,
it
right,
doesn't
right.
take much.
And I guess that this can be summed up as a great analogy for just building that meditative state and going forward with the, like the human potential, the optimization
Right.
effect is
Yep.
that you're going to get into space, and you're going to be able
Yep.
to realize that the
Right.
resistance against you improving as a person, as a human being, evolving is going to be a
Yep.
lot less than it was even,
Exactly.
however long ago when you started.
Yeah,
So,
thank you, Luke. That's exactly right. That we have access to a kind of an internal escape velocity where you're untethered by the things that typically weigh us down in our lives.
right,
Aside from the human condition, right, which is inescapable, which we reconcile ourselves to, our fundamental isolatedness in our own minds, our fundamental, lack of exogenous meaning in the universe, where it is clear to us what this life and universe is about or for, or the fact that, or the high likelihood, as I like to say, that we'll someday die, that this body will cease. I say high likelihood because it is making an inference based on past experiences that cannot be predicted. And the fact of the
mhm.
matter is that you may be the one who doesn't, or I may be the one. We don't know that, but we have a high likelihood, right? Given all that came before us. It's what
Mhm.
Hume called the problem of induction. The fact that you haven't seen a black swan doesn't mean that there is no such thing as a black swan, but
Right.
it's highly likely. So um, and the last one is the bondage that we are restricted by nature. Nature itself does not sort of allow for very much freedom. We can't fly. We can't. There's restrictions on our human condition. But short of that, right? Like that, once we can reconcile ourselves to these existential givens, as they're called, there's this school of thought that all of psychotherapy is really about reconciling ourselves to the existential givens as they're manifesting in life, like career difficulties or relationship difficulties or health issues, whatever it is. It's really coming down to how well can I accept my humanness or my condition as a living being. And once I'm able to do that, then there is a certain liberation available to us, is to live while we're still alive, right?
Right.
To be unfettered, to achieve that internal escape velocity.
So it's always the balance of being of accepting as opposed as well as achieving, as a striving.
Right,
Like
right,
you're always going to have that nice mix of an acceptance and pushing yourself forward.
yeah,
Because I think that's probably like where the like the balance kind of like is sustained by, if you're going to just go super full throttle into trying to improve yourself, I think you're inevitably going to maybe get to the point where you're starting to beat up on yourself because you're not where you want to be. And I think there's a lot of people maybe that are like the A-type personality, the high achievers, that are prone to that, where they're just they have the opposite of maybe what a lot of people are trying to get, with that motivation
yep,
to kind of really push themselves forward.
yep.
But then when things don't turn out the way they want, which, like you said, because of our human condition, we have a lot of
Mm-hmm.
situations where it's not going to be like the way we imagined it.
Yeah,
We need that level of acceptance to keep
yeah.
ourselves, moving forward, I guess, to keep ourselves like on the level.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right to put your finger on that. It's in fact the other side of that Michael Jordan documentary that I haven't heard or seen much talk about, but I found kind of interesting. I mean, here was this extraordinary player who's, I mean, I hesitate somewhat to say this, but like, I think there's, it's fair to suggest that he has peaked, that he will never sort of achieve that kind of extraordinary uh, condition in his life ever again.
Mm-hmm.
And yet now he has perhaps decades remaining to live
Where
out his years.
he's still gonna be alive. He's like his journey hasn't finished, but
Nope.
maybe the
Right.
performance has peaked. And
Right. And I mean, I think that there's potential pitfalls of that, like not to say that it wasn't kind of and isn't an extraordinary achievement and feat of, what he was able to do, and like a shooting star. And I think this is why we see oftentimes celebrities burn out at a young age, and sometimes quite literally they will sort of overdose or, get themselves into some kind of trouble, is because they don't have this perspective of the life in its totality. And so they will sort of cope with drugs or alcohol or other vices as a way of sort of mitigating what happens when you've tasted a kind of freedom, but struggle to maintain it, or struggle to sort of
right.
find some ways of seamlessly integrating it into this life, right? This particular body and this particular duration of the human condition.
Right. And that's where I think I guess what the antidote to that would be the acceptance piece.
Yeah.
And that's, I guess, where they're lacking, is that they're just not, they still have that condition that they're in, and they can work as hard as they can to keep their self optimized and keep their potential going forward. But you have to always do with that level of acceptance of you are in the situation, you are who you are.
Yep.
Your body needs food, you need water,
Right. Yeah. And maybe you can sort of rededicate those abilities or those insights. I think this is why a lot of extraordinary players become coaches, or they write books, or they find another way of sort of honing their potential into some, they have to adapt. They have to adapt. And like that's the thing, is sort of like, constantly adapting. The insights of in Buddhism is that change is the constant, and that there is no static self, as we sort of touched on earlier.
Right.
And then there's also this fundamental unease, given that things are constantly changing and there's no static self. Anicca, anatta, dukkha, this idea that we're in this constant state of flux. Can we stay facile in mind and body to navigate change itself?
Right. The idea of trying to, I guess, integrate your will with that of your situation, and the fluidity of your situation.
Exactly.
Because there's always that opposing force where, again, like if you're going to box and people are telling you lots of negative things, you don't want to believe that at face value, but you also have to build this like sense of awareness of being able to see what it is and accept it for what it is, and be able to, I guess, work around it. And use your potential to the best in that particular situation. So there's a lot of layers that goes into self-optimization.
I would say, I mean, I guess there's a usefulness in simplifying and articulating. I mean, these questions sort of raise the layers, and we're examining them in our conversation. I'm sure that there are people out there will sort of have a very simplified, coherent model. They may listen to this and sort of say like, "Oh, you spent much time in school," or but I can appreciate that like a specific there's a slice you can take on this view that it can be very simple. Like when you were talking about sort of going with the flow of nature, this idea of the Tao, or Wu Wei. I know I'm mixing traditions, where the way I interpret it, at least, is that you're moving with the flow of life. You're not fighting, right? And maybe you're positioning yourself and understanding the nature of the flow, such that you aren't obstructing the flow, but you're also utilizing the flow. You're it serves you and it serves those around you, and that you're sort of participating in that flow. What they call wu wei, this effortless effort. So there's a way of
Right.
primacy of the one's state of mind. You might sort of pick up in the course of this entire conversation. The state of mind is so primary to so much of it.
Right. It's the essential part. It's the key that opens the door.
Yep.
And then I guess like the second part that you're saying that is that the other side of it is to have the sharpness of mind, and to what to actually be striving for would be to have the ability to go along with the flow of life and of like the environment.
Right.
Do it in the most effective way.
Right. And the sharpness of mind that can be practiced and cultivated, rational logic, reasoning. I don't know if you're familiar with praxeology, the study of human action. It is a valuable sort of interpretation or way of looking at human behavior that, unlike psychology, which looks at human motivations and drives, are merely observing human behavior for what it is, that humans act out of perceived self-interest. Rationally or irrationally, they're doing what they think is the right thing to do. And there is, I think, a value in understanding things from that perspective, that you don't judge a person for sort of thinking or behaving or feeling a certain way on its face. I mean, you might feel a certain way about it, but that's sort of separate from like, a person put in a particular situation, given certain circumstances, will act in a certain way, and that can be predicted fairly well. A spiritual teacher I know sort of refers to, think of people like trees, which I interpret to mean, without much expectation that they will be something that they're not. Appreciate them. It's okay. This particular tree gives fruit. This particular tree offers shade. This particular tree is pretty to look at, or, and I need to, make it something that it isn't.
Right.
And
that would help build like the unity with the universe or the external environment, or whatever you want to call it. The part of it that's not inside of you, that helps to build that kind of internal peace and serenity.
Yes, you said it right. That's right. And so there's a way of navigating this that isn't demanding that it be something that it isn't, that the universe itself is as it is. So I accept it. And
accept it and work with it, and be cognizant of it and conscious of it, and
and understand, like, I think rationality is like a skill, a reason, and logic. You think things clearly enough that you can begin to make sort of extrapolations of how things play out, predictions and forecasting, which is another sort of interesting area. I know, I don't know enough to get into it at this point in time, but it's a skill that a person can get good at, being able to forecast trends, not only in their personal lives, but in their sort of global or national or regional, circumstances, how things will play out, certain forces, and to sort of be in it, but not of it, right? You can sort of see it for what it is, and then position yourself accordingly. And you're not there when the collapse happens, for example.
Right. So being able to, again, like, I guess coming back to what we were talking about before, the idea of having the sharpness of mind to go with the flow and not being judgmental of it, accepting it for what it is. And that will give you the awareness and the engagement of being able to see, where things are going with a little bit more clarity. And that will help your forecasting ability, and that actually in turn will help you in the end to to be at the right place at the right time, or put yourself at the right advantage. All right, guys. So what do you think about reaching your full potential? Have you had any support from your peers? What do you guys think about Dan's ideas of escape velocity, problem of induction, and bondage of nature? Let me know in the comments below. So stay tuned for our next installment where we're going to talk about using psychedelics for self-improvement. Until then, do what makes you strong, stop doing what makes you weak!